suggesting, Mr. President, says Kirk Douglas, his jaw straighter line even than usual, there's a military plot to take over the government. That is the fulcrum in a movie called 7 Days in May, that when it came out was terrifying political science fiction. And yet now, as Trump brings the plot points of that film to life, in this America, today, it is clear that the military plot to take over the government posited in that film undersold the idea because it left out what is now evident after Trump's purge of the Pentagon over the weekend and after what his Secretary of Defense just said about removing legal roadblocks to what they intend to do. I'm suggesting there's a military plot to take over the government orchestrated by the government. Trump fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and replaced him with a junior officer he brought back from retirement whom he claims once wore a MAGA cap in his presence, a retired lieutenant general named Dan Raisin Kane. Trump likes the nickname, the way he liked Mad Dog Mattis, because Trump has the brain of a not very bright fourth grader. Trump fired the judge advocate of the Army, the judge advocate of the Navy, and the judge advocate of the Air Force as well Friday. Trump also fired the Chief of Naval Operations and the Vice Chief of the Air Force and 5,400 civilian Pentagon employees to start. What you have been told by news organizations, even ones that still have good reporters, is that this is part of the Trump Racism Orgy. The fired Joint Chiefs Chairman, Charles Q. Brown, is black. The Chief of Naval Operations was a woman. Their identities are cover stories and red meat for the Trump cult, and I'm sure that pleases Musk and the rest of the apartheid gang, but they are incidental to the real purpose here. Trump fired the head of the military and replaced him with somebody he believes, though General Kane denies it, wore the "I am a Trump slave" cap. Trump looked at the top lawyers at the Army, Navy, and Air Force, the ones who would tell him, no, you cannot have the Army shoot civilians, and no, you cannot have the Navy blockade Vancouver and Greenland and the Panama Canal, and you can't bomb the next Democratic convention, and he fired those people. At least 6 different reporters and commentators regularly on the military beat said the same thing. Firing the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is bad. It is a red flag. Firing the TJACs, the judge advocates, the lawyers who tell you when something you are going to do with the military is illegal, that can mean only one thing. You are planning to do something with the military that is illegal. You fire the people who would say it's illegal and replace them in advance with the people who would say it isn't illegal. Where am I getting this from? There is one positive, and one positive only, if you happened to have made a guy who may have brain damage from alcoholism your Secretary of Defense. He would not know when to hide the secret parts. Why did they fire the T-Jags? Pete Hegseth on Fox yesterday, quote, "We want lawyers who don't exist to attempt to be roadblocks to anything that happens." Anything that happens, Pistol Pete? Anything in particular? General Barry McCaffrey, with whom I briefly worked at MSNBC and who I found unexpectedly complete and very civilian-ish, went even further. Quote, "This has nothing to do with competence. This is creating an oath of loyalty by the armed forces to the leader." You will recall that more than 2 months ago, a story appeared, burst across our horizons, and then vanished. Prospective occupants of high posts inside the Pentagon, wrote the New York Times, were asked, quote, which candidate the applicants had supported in the 3 most recent elections, what they thought about the events of January 6th, and whether they believed the 2020 election was stolen. Then, with dry, macabre wit not usually associated with the New York Times, quote, "The sense they got was there was only one right answer to each question. No one who answered any of the questions with the truth got the job." This is not complicated. I'm suggesting there's a military plot to take over the government orchestrated by the government. And it starts not with any military, but with a private military, loyal to Trump, beholden to Trump, because it is nominally run by incompetents and drunks and people who not only have skeletons in their closets, but had to build additions to their homes for extra closet space just for the skeletons. If you put Pete Hegseth, who could never make the giant career leap all the way from weekend propagandist on Fox to weekday propagandist on Fox, if you put him in charge of all this, he is going to thank his lucky stars and you, and by thank you, I mean he will kill people for you. Now, there are different degrees of hell here. In the best-case scenario, what Trump did Friday night, firing Joint Chiefs Chairman Brown and the Advocates General and the others, was a complete and self-contained act. Trump is still stinging from Mathis and John Kelly and Mark Milley, and he wants his generals. He's no specific use for them right now, no specific plan, not yet anywhere, not near term anyway. He likes Russia. He likes Putin's relationship with the military. Russia is great if you're Putin. Russia is great if you're Trump. And the rest of you can go F yourselves. Trump wants military parades with tanks. He wants a big hat like Kim Jong-un has. He wants a world in which everybody not only calls him sir, but everybody has to call him sir. Because of all the successful men in the history of the world, Trump is easily the unhappiest. Musk is second, but Trump is the unhappiest. And he needs to be saluted because nothing convinces him he's not a draft dodger more than having generals call him sir, and having his own army of suck-ups would fill that hole where his life should have been. Well, it will fill that hole for a minute. The vanity army. And that is if we are lucky. The next best case, the Pentagon over to the dark side, is there to be a political weapon. The generals generally will not say, yes, we could overtake Greenland in 3-4 days. We could defeat Canada in a month. No, not that we're going to. MAGA generals, that would be My American Generals Again generals, under Raising Cane, they would say all that. The problems, though, really arise if it's the next level, if this is not about literal saber rattling. Having your private chairman of the Joint Chiefs and not just the military equivalents of Pam Bondi or Kash Patel telling you, yes, sir, you sure can use the army that way, sir, is that when Trump sends them to shoot migrants and refugees and babies at the southern border, or when he sends them to Panama, or when he sends them into Mexico or into Canada, because all dictators in each country, on each page of history, always eventually descend into territorial expansion. When Trump says, go invade Canada, they would snap a salute and give him another medal and another braid of gold, and they'd go invade Canada. Still, it can get worse from here. No, I am not defending nor even theoretically tolerating invading Canada or, quote, taking back the Panama Canal. But if that's the limit of Trump's plan for his private Pentagon, those things could be undone. The next scenarios cannot. The next scenario is when Trump goes to the judge advocates and says, I want you to legally approve Operation Undetectable Comb-Over. And they say, undetectable comb-over is legally approved. And he hands it to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he says, I serve at the pleasure of the president. And the chairman of the Joint Chiefs engages. And that's when we all find out that Operation Undetectable Comb-Over is the revelation of a fabricated crisis, or a fabricated insurrection plot, or a fabricated coup attempt against Trump, and the military rolls onto the streets in the blue states and starts rounding up politicians and governmental leaders, and it starts shooting Democrats. And of course, the road Trump took his first big steps down Friday night could go 1 mile further, one nightmare worse. It's now Operation Perpetual Stability we are talking about, and it's all the previous fake plots and non-existent threats, and it includes every right-wing paranoid conspiracy theory, and it reprises all those good old fake Bush-era terrorist threats with exploding ATMs and the guy who thought he could snap the Brooklyn Bridge using only a lug nut wrench. Only this time, Trump's Army and Trump's Navy and Trump's Air Force and Trump's new elite gold bronzer stormtroops probably are not there to shoot their weapons. They're just there to point them, because Operation Perpetual Stability requires that Trump stays in office indefinitely and that the elections be suspended. And if you don't like it, tell it to the tank. I'm suggesting there's a military plot to take over the government orchestrated by the government. Where are the Democrats on this? Well, it was the weekend. What were you expecting? There's no overtime paid defending democracy against a dictator, besides which all of our visual aids and easel boards are still at Adorama for the big news conference this week about egg prices. Because, I mean, weren't you here on November 5th? This whole democracy thing just does not sell as a campaign issue. And you may be suggesting there's a military plot to take over the government, but I'm suggesting every one of our 43 million Democratic consultants agrees we can't do more than one thing at a time, and we can't, under any circumstances, prioritize anything over this graphic that shows the cost of a gallon of gas. So in response, we need Democratic leg breakers out there, metaphorically. The courts can slow this down. The lawsuits can buy time until the midterms. But the Democratic electeds have to rip up the railroad tracks. I'm not going to start again about impeachment. However, finally, a sign from Hakeem Jeffries yesterday that he may get some of this. He went on the Sunday shows and said the Republicans have the White House, they have the Senate, they have the Congress. They are the ones who have to pass the budget and pass everything else. And that his job as the leader of the 215 Democrats in the House is to find just 3 Republicans to sink the budget, or sink the latest giveaways to the billionaires, or sink just about anything apartheid Clyde Musk tries. Finding 3 Republicans? Quoting Jeffries, that is going to be an ongoing effort over these next few days to identify those individuals. Woohoo! At minimum, Jeffries and other Democrats at all levels can piss Trump off, because nobody makes mistakes like Trump, and nobody makes worse mistakes than a pissed-off Trump. I give you, as an example of that, Democratic Governor Janet Mills of Maine telling Trump she would see him in court over this imaginary trans athlete crisis.
The NCAA has complied immediately, by the way. That's good. But I understand Maine. Is the Maine here, the governor of Maine? Well,
down here.
Are you not going to comply with it?
I'm complying with state and federal laws.
We are the federal law. Well, you better do it. You better do it, because you're not going to get any federal funding at all if you don't. And by the way, your population, even though it's somewhat liberal, although I did very well there, your population doesn't want men playing in women's sports. So you better comply, because otherwise you're not getting any federal funding.
See you in court.
Every state, good. I'll see you in court. I look forward to that. That should be a real easy one. And enjoy your life after governor, because I don't think you'll be in elected politics.
F you, Fats. Usually when states go to court, writes the civil rights lawyer Matthew Siegel, alleging federal coercion in violation of the 10th Amendment, there is not a literal video of the president doing it. There's something else to impeach him for. There's something more to impeach him for. Put it on the list. And a reminder, by the way, Democrats, you do not have to wait until he has violated every amendment and each clause to impeach him. 10th Amendment. A real quickie. Quote, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. Thank you for the on-camera confession, Donald Krasnoff. There are other Trump-owned goals to celebrate. Republicans are openly cheering the illegal dismantling of the government by Musk and the incels, but Politico reported that privately they are all using back channels, everyone they can find, to make it stop, especially when veterans are fired or Department of Agriculture employees are fired as bird flu decimates the farms, or as more and more polls show the public is not at all on board with any of this. CNN poll, 66% say Trump shouldn't freeze funding without congressional approval. 66, two-thirds. 52% say he's overstepped his powers, and 57% say he's exceeded his authority. By the way, talk about polling. The new Nazis in Germany, the AfD party, Musk's stormtroopers, the ones he campaigned for, they underperformed polling in yesterday's elections there. Then there's Musk and this reply to this email with the top 5 things you did this week or you have resigned email, which, it will be clear very shortly, was Trump's idea, but which Trump intends to let Musk take the fall for. While the emails were still fresh in the inboxes, leadership in the State Department, at the VA, at the FBI, at other government arms had instructed their employees to ignore the email. Per Josh Marshall at Talking Points memo, somebody at OPM, the Government Office of Personnel Management, saw all this coming last month and put out a preliminary warning then, last month, that the threats in any emails carried no weight, and responding to DOGE was entirely voluntary. Turns out Musk is not a strung out and flawed genius. He's just strung out and flawed.
You got to protect the First Amendment. It's not much more important than that.
Yeah, I mean, I got a lot of criticism, and people said, well, that proves he's a huge idiot from a, look, he voted for whatever, $44 billion, and now it's worth like 8 cents. And
it's not worth 8 cents.
It was essentially to buy freedom of expression.
Sure. Whatever you say, Chainsaw Boy. Cat got your tongue? Why is Musk so nuts? I don't travel in these social media circles, so I am new to this info, which I guess is more than a week old now, but the rapper Azalea Banks may have answered that question while answering a rando's question about why it seems, and we are covered by the fog of war here, but why it seems Musk fathered another baby with a right-wing influencer, but did it by in vitro. The rando wrote, I heard he has a botched penis implant. Azalea Banks retweeted this and added 5 crucial words to I heard he has a botched penis implant. Grimes told me this too. Oh, there we go. That, friend, would explain everything. For most of us guys, just the phrase botched penis implant can cause 6 to 8 weeks of clouded, irrational thinking. Imagine actually suffering one. Elon Musk. Am I right? Am I right? Elon Musk? Botched penis implant. You would try to destroy the world, too. 2 notes before we get to the Joy Reid firing. This is also media news. They may still supply useful reporting from time to time. I just quoted them, in fact, but you must now officially be suspicious of anything you hear from Politico. Not only did the new European owners of that company praise J.D. Vance's attack on European leaders, but the new White House bureau chief of Politico, Dasha Burns, legitimized a discussion at the latest CPAC fascist rally. Ms. Burns of Politico, as Ms. Burns of Politico, did a one-on-one interview with a crowd with all-purpose Trumpist idiot Rick Grenell at CPAC. She's done. They're done. It's journalistically disqualifying. I can never trust another word she says. What do you mean you did an event at CPAC? At CPAC. I can only suggest that this would be identical to Ms. Burns sitting down at some gigantic gathering of the Communist Party. Or maybe the American Association of Cannibals and interviewing the head chief cannibal. If her name Dasha Burns rings a bell, she was at NBC when she and Kristen Welker and 10 other top political reporters violated every possible journalistic ethic by accepting a free meal the night before the 2023 Republican presidential debate in Milwaukee from Trump thugs Stephen Chung, Chris LaCivita, and Jason Miller. Hope everybody watched their drinks. So anyway, if you were thinking, what about Dasha Burns' own personal standards? Don't got any. And then there's this. We know Trump looks at our form of government, points at all the humans in it, and thinks it divides evenly into two parts. Those parts he can grab for himself, and those parts he can privatize and sell off. The post office turns out to be one of the latter. The first step to look for this week is for him to dissolve the leadership of USPS and fold the service into the Commerce Department. One online wag suggested the first result would be a brand new postage stamp that would honor Donald Trump. I would add that a Trump stamp would be the first one ever designed that could lick itself. Elon Musk, am I right? Also of interest here on an all-new edition of Countdown, and I hope you have some time for segment B, is about half an hour long. MSNBC fired Joy Reid. And yes, it is racist. And maybe worse. Yes, it is designed to keep out people who might think differently. And it is designed to reward professional political salespeople like ex-party chairmen and former press secretaries who will do what they are told by their bosses. But most of all, since they also fired Alex Wagner as they fired Joy Reid, at least the New York Times says this, it means that 4 women of color have solo-hosted prominent shows on MSNBC, and all 4 of them have now been fired. And then there is the turmoil around hockey's Wayne Gretzky, or as he is now known, the man without a country. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
I heard the news Saturday night. Joy Reid out at MSNBC, and it turned out to be much bigger than that. Joy Reid, per the New York Times, to be replaced from her 7 p.m. show by moving a weekend show on MSNBC featuring Michael Steele, who is a politician and brand salesman, although he has not been active recently in the Republican Party. He's a salesman. Simone Sanders, a politician and brand saleswoman from the Democratic Party. She's a saleswoman. Alicia Menendez, who is the daughter of the senator from New Jersey. You may have heard about him, who's a different kind of salesman, and she has largely been a party salesperson. Nothing wrong with that show. It's been on for several years on the weekends on MSNBC, and it's kind of interesting, I suppose. There's nothing wrong with it unless you want insight or commentary or new people you have not heard from before. It is textbook MSNBC. They lost the idea I gave them and thought this is what it was. Salesmanship as opposed to commentary or insight. They're also offing Alex Wagner. In addition to Joy Reid, Alex Wagner will not return after what happens to Maddow happens at the end of the 100 days. They may replace her with Jen Psaki. And if anybody on television, besides her counterparts who are all on Fox, anybody is a salesperson as opposed to an analyst or a commentator, it's Jen Psaki. Jen Psaki, who recently said that she was wondering if maybe she had oversold Merrick Garland, and if perhaps she was beginning to wonder if she regretted doing such a good job convincing people Merrick Garland should be the Attorney General of the United States. And one wonders if everything that we're going through now ends up in the worst possible place, if, as we all get marched into the camps, Jen Psaki will be still wondering if she made a mistake supporting Merrick Garland. These people are salespersons, doctrinaire, and often it's doctrinaire bullshit. If you have been a salesperson, a press secretary for a politician these days, you have, lied. Some people manage to swerve back from this to become decent human beings. Believe it or not, one of Bush's secretaries, Scott McClellan, actually one day woke up and said, "I'm better than this," and wrote a tell-all book and promptly disappeared from politics. And I'm sure he's had a happy life since. Because if you're going to sell politics to people, if you're actually going to sell things that you don't believe in, that you haven't analyzed, that you can't find flaw in, that you feel like you shouldn't mention the flaws in, you're irrelevant. Michael Steele was the chairman of the Republican Party, and as much as he's come to be an anti-Trump voice and a useful one, every time I see him, I think, what is this guy trying to sell me? Also, that's a nighttime version, 3 hosts, of the Scarborough Show in the morning. But I'm wandering off the main topics here. I've had lots of problems with Alex Wagner. I've told you the stories. I told you that she was not, when I tried to bring her in as the guest host who would have succeeded Lawrence O'Donnell after Lawrence O'Donnell succeeded Rachel Maddow as the guest host on my show, I told you that it was apparent from the beginning she was not interested in doing the harder parts of the job. Very smart, insightful, obviously very good on television, but just not interested. I told the story about how she did not want to learn how to use the teleprompter and was confident she would pick it up. And that's when we sort of bailed out on her. And on her first show on MSNBC, just 12 years later, the prompter failed and she did not know what to do and stood there for several moments waving at the prompter as if she could get it to move by waving at it and nobody would notice. So I have lots of problems with her, but Alex Wagner was not a salesperson for some politician or political point of view. That political points of view might have coincided with her opinions. Yes, that was true of me, too. I was not a salesperson for the Democratic Party and all things Democrat, and if you doubt that, ask Hillary Clinton how she feels about me as a salesperson for all things Democrat. But I am moving away from the main topic here. Joy Reid was fired by MSNBC. There's lots of other ways to phrase this, and I'm sure they will dress this up to some degree, and I'm sure she will get some money out of the deal. But I don't think we are really understanding the impact this is going to have on the MSNBC brand. Inside the new company that's running NBC or MSNBC and the ex-NBC cable networks, inside that, this is a big day for them because they've just removed a pain in the ass. Just like when I agreed to leave after they breached my contract, even though they had to give me roughly $20 million over the course of several years because they breached my contract, they were so happy that I went. They are still happy, even though we spent the next 10 years dancing about possibly me coming back because things were so bad over there. But where is the reaction here? Where is the reaction from the MSNBC hosts who didn't get fired in a Saturday Night Massacre in all small letters? The reaction from the MSNBC hosts is no surprise. It's no surprise because there's been no reaction. Maddow? Nothing. Al Sharpton? Have we heard anything from Al Sharpton? Because there's something about Joy Reid that I haven't gotten to yet that's kind of important here. In addition to the fact that, just practically speaking, the conduit to bring people to MSNBC and thus to what remains of mainstream television news. The conduit, the person who said, let's book this guest and let's bring in that guy and let's bring in this woman and let's talk about this topic, which would have been different than everything else on the air on MSNBC. That was Joy Reid. And I had lots of problems with lots of stuff she said, and I thought lots of stuff she said was absolutely crazy, and so what? Going back and looking at my shows from 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, I don't agree with everything I said then myself, let alone what other people said. It's not supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be inconsistent. It's supposed to be poking different areas to see what holds up and what doesn't. It's supposed to be saying, yeah, I like this Occupy Wall Street thing. No, this is bullshit. It's supposed to be like that. It's not supposed to be, here is today's show. We could record this and play it back to you 2 years from now, and you wouldn't know the difference. That's not what it's supposed to be, and unfortunately, the entirety of the MSNBC lineup has become that, except the morning show, which is, of course, MSNVC. Because there's a problem here, a larger problem, and nobody is going to say this. Do you remember Melissa Harris Perry? She used to be on my show, later known as Melissa Harris Lacewell. They gave her her own show, in large part because she did such a good job as an analyst on mine and a couple of other shows, and she got her own show, and they fired her. You remember Tiffany Cross? Now there was somebody who liked to poke at things and see whether or not they were true. And again, lots of things she said, I went, holy crap, wrong. But so what? You have to have room for that. And what they are saying at MSNBC is we're not going to have room for that anymore. She got fired. So Melissa Harris Lacewell Perry, or Melissa Harris Perry Lacewell. I'm sorry, Melissa, I could never keep it straight. She got fired. Tiffany Cross got fired. Remember Tiffany Cross? Among the other things, Tucker Carlson attacked her. She was the one who would go back and say this was on Fox the way I used to. Tucker Carlson claimed that Tiffany Cross was inspiring genocide like Rwanda. Seriously. MSNBC's response, rather than to come at Tucker Carlson with 5 million metaphorical machine guns, was to fire Tiffany Cross. Because you can have controversy as long as it's controversy, trademark, and you can sell it, trademark, and you can put a smile on its face, trademark, and you can give it a little silly grin or a kind of sad grin or a feel-good grin, and then you can say, now here's Lawrence O'Donnell. They fired her. They fired Melissa Harris Lacewell. Now they fired Joy Reid. Now they fired Alex Wagner. Melissa Harris Perry, Tiffany Cross, Joy Reid, Alex Wagner, 4 women. What did they have in common? Well, let's see. They all had their own shows, solo hosts on MSNBC, and they were all women of color, and they've all been fired. I believe, I'm not certain of this, I spent enough time wondering about MSNBC firings. I don't need to go through the list again. Forgive me if I've gotten this wrong, but I do know they're the last 4, if not the only 4 women of color to have hosted shows on MSNBC, and they've all been fired. And they've all been replaced by, well, but Michael Steele is a man of color, and Simone Sanders is a woman of color, and Alicia Menendez is a woman of color. Yeah, they are official. They are safe. They are not going to do crazy things or bring in people you've never heard of before who turn out to be better than the people you've heard of. And they also may hire a professor from Columbia who's a woman of color, and they fired the only remaining women of color who were solo anchoring political commentary shows on prominent national television networks. Alex Wagner, I think, probably is relieved by this, and it doesn't mean that just because you're a woman of color or a person of color, your show should be held to a lower standard and you should get 25 years to improve it. No, at some point, guess what? I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's Jesus Christ fresh off the cross, a man of color, that you would say, hey, Jesus, I'm sorry, it doesn't quite work, and the new woodworking segments, they weren't any good either. That's not the point. The point is not you must protect all people of color who get television shows, but if the show is of value And the ratings for Joy Reid's show went up and down just as MSNBC's overall ratings went. And is it possible that maybe she wasn't best for the 7 o'clock slot? Maybe later in the evening? Maybe there might have been a greater audience? Maybe at 10 o'clock? Now, what they saw was people have been sharing clips of the nightmare that is the Scott, what's-his-name show, Scott Jennings on CNN, which is nominally Abby Phillip show. And poor Abby Phillip goes out there and gets tortured by this racist Scott Jennings. It's his show, and it's a bunch of people talking about how much of a racist he is, and he leans back in the chair and rocks back and forth and mugs to the camera and creates viral clips. And somebody at MSNBC said, wouldn't we rather have that than Joy Reid, who's now bald, appearing on television every night at 7 o'clock? Don't we want this? Won't this make it easier to sell this company when we want to? Won't it make it easier the next time Trump threatens NBC and MSNBC for us to say, but we fired Joy Reid? More practically, MSNBC's problems in terms of its profitability and its ratings had nothing to do with Joy Reid. As I said, her ratings went up and down exactly as Chris Hayes' ratings went up and down, and Maddow's ratings went up and down, and Maddow's replacements like Wagner, their ratings went up and down. Lawrence O'Donnell went up and down. The Weekends went up and down, including the Simone Sanders, Michael Steele, Alicia Menendez show ratings went up and down. All in the same sine curves. The problem at MSNBC is Joe Scarborough, and until you fire Joe Scarborough and get rid of MSNBC and what that told people who watch that network, which I'm talking about largely because, A, I did invent it. B, it is the only liberal network. It is the only thing even close to being a liberal network. And the better it is for our society as we attempt to keep democracy or some shred of democracy alive. We need a strong, vibrant, loud, fearless MSNBC and not The View, forgive me, at 7 o'clock every night. We need people like Joy Reid. Even if you sit there and go, I'm not watching that, it's important that she's there for the people who want to identify with somebody who looks like Joy Reid and say, that woman is out here trying to argue my point and is talking to me and is bringing people who look like me and look like her onto television for the first time. And some of them are going to become superstars. And if we ever get out of this goddamned mess caused by lack of courage, often on places like MSNBC, often in places in the public discourse, if we're ever going to get out of this mess and restore this democracy, it's going to be because of people like Joy Reid, even if you don't agree with a goddamned word she said. No, keep Joe Scarborough. I'm now supporting Trump again. You've heard me talk about Trump being Hitler all this time. I guess I was wrong. Remember when I was trying to be his vice president? Take somebody off his show to put him on in primetime, Michael Steele. Not take somebody off his show, Joe Scarborough, and put anything on, including Bugs Bunny cartoons, would be a better political statement at 7 o'clock in the morning on MSNBC. And much more consistent and eloquent. And Bugs Bunny did not have a deviated septum either. One last procedural thing about this. About MSNBC, and it is, I think of it the way I do ESPN. Not like an ex-spouse, but really as, and it's a little pretentious, but as a child that sometimes I have had good relationships with and sometimes I've not. And to some degree, it's the same thing in limited doses with ESPN. I did not father ESPN. It was well established before I got there. But there are aspects to that relationship in which I go, oh, boy, that's not going to work out for you later on. Take it from an old man. And I feel that way about MSNBC. And the other part about this is, okay, you've had turmoil now at 9 o'clock. Maddow retired. Maddow went to once a week. They didn't know what to do about Maddow. Maddow's going to be replaced 4 days a week by Alex Wagner. Oh, no, that's not working. We're going to bring Maddow back for 5 days a week. She's not going to do it long term. We'll bring Alex Wagner back after this in April. Oh, no, we're not bringing her back. It's probably going to be Jen Psaki. You know what? Jen Psaki's going to prove to not really be a television person. There's going to be somebody else needed at 9 o'clock. Oh, and let's now create chaos at 7 o'clock because, honest to God, the first thing I thought of when I was told on Saturday night that they might get rid of Joy Reid or that it was done already The first thing I thought of, they're going to try to bring back Chris Matthews. Because they tried to bring back Chris Matthews in the morning with Joe Scarborough. Because we need Chris Matthews right now, because the shallow, random firings of the few electrons in his brain, something actually getting across those synapses, knocking his references to himself out of the way for a brief second. That's exactly what MSNBC and the political dialogue needs right now. Joe Scarborough and Chris Matthews. When we go to the camps and the doors open, the guys in the hats with the keys will be Joe Scarborough and Chris Matthews. But back to the point about Joy Reid, and I would love to come to you again on Thursday and say, you know what, I apologize to this MSNBC anchor, and I apologize to Al Sharpton, and I apologize to this group I said they were going to say nothing, and look at this. There's a 5,000-person encampment outside 30 Rock protesting Joy Reid getting fired. I'd love to say that to you. I do not expect to have to do it. I'm not writing notes down for Thursday's show about the big backlash within MSNBC about Joy Reid, because Joy Reid threatens all of their money. Joy Reid says something controversial. Rachel Maddow thinks, I have $25 million coming to me. I want my money. But the chaos is the real legend, the real history of MSNBC. I don't know that I've ever shared this with you. It took a friend of mine named Rainey and I several days worth of going through old memos to compile this list. I've told you many times that I worked, and this is my story about Joy Reid getting fired, that of course comes back to me. I worked at MSNBC from its second year, 1997, through the end of its third year, 1998. I did the 8 o'clock show. It was the first show anybody paid attention to on MSNBC, and eventually I couldn't stand doing it anymore. It was all about Bill Clinton, and I couldn't do it anymore, and they sold me to Fox, and I got out. And then that didn't work, and I went to CNN for a while, and they chose Connie Chung to host their 8 o'clock show instead of me, so that didn't work out. And NBC was short an anchor at MSNBC and invited me to come over for a couple of days. And the next thing I knew, I signed a contract to do the 8 o'clock show again 5 years later. And my friend Rainey and I, before it was apparent that I was going to stay there, when it looked like I was just there for a couple of days filling in because they were short of anchors, we compiled this list of all the shows that had been on after I left the network on December 4th, 1998. And this is my fear of what is going to happen to MSNBC in the next couple of years. The revolving door. The game of musical chairs. Just listen to this. So they had started the network with a show called Internight, which had like 16 different hosts. They'd try to get somebody to sit down and do an hour-long interview. And they had everybody from Bob Costas to Bill Moyers. They had 16 different hosts. And it was filmed. It was on at 8 o'clock at night, and nobody watched it. So they needed a live television news show before the Brian Williams newscast at 9 o'clock, and I was it, October 1st, 1997 to December 4th, 1998. And then I escaped. And they replaced me with a guy who they thought was exactly the same kind of show. John Hockenberry. John lasted from December of 98 all the way through to February of 99. And then eventually they moved him to the afternoon, and when they fired him in August of 1999 in his last show, he asked rhetorically, how much does cable suck? And the answer is still being played out. John had all kinds of problems dealing with women, as in he was a sexual harasser. Okay, anyway, so he gets fired. The show that replaced me lasted 3 months. Then they put on 2 half-hour shows, equal time with Oliver North, premiering in February of 1999, and the McLaughlin Special Report. John McLaughlin from the McLaughlin Report. Wrong! That guy. They did 2 half hours. That lasted a month. They decided Oliver North needed half an hour, but he needed a rotating set of co-hosts. Now, I want to clear this up. None of the co-hosts sat there and rotated. They had different hosts. They were on a rotational basis. I think, in retrospect, they regret this, that it should have been Oliver North with a co-host who rotated. The co-hosts included Cynthia Oxney, Peter Fenn, and Kiki Moore. I can picture 2 of these 3 people. And at 8:30, they replaced Special Report from McLaughlin. That was canceled, and they brought in Time and Again, which was reruns of old NBC News features. In April of 1999, so a month later, it became a permanent hour-long show with Oliver North and Paul Begala as co-hosts. May 30th of 1999, so 6 weeks later, it became North and Begala, shortened to half an hour. And Time and Again came back. So it was Time and Again, it's Time and Again. Another month later, in June 1999, they replaced the whole thing. Oliver North out, special edition with Ann Curry in. Filmed recuts of Ann Curry pieces from Dateline and other shows. And I love Ann Curry. I worked with her in Los Angeles. A great person, a wonderful human being to my mind. And again, at 8:30, Time and Again. Then they expanded in about a month. In July of 1999, the special edition with Ann Curry went to an hour. Then Ann Curry left the program in May of 2000, and they made it special edition with Lori Dew. Then in August, so now 3 months later, it became MSNBC Investigates. And the joke was MSNBC Investigates what happened to Lori Dew. On September 28th, 2000, they made MSNBC Investigates a 4-day-a-week show. So Monday through Thursday, it was MSNBC Investigates. Again, this is all the 8 o'clock hour after I left. We're on show 12 so far. Year 2, show 12 in the 8 o'clock slot. MSNBC Investigates. But on Friday, that wasn't MSNBC Investigates. It was a weekly show called Missing Persons with Diane Diamond. Soon it was Missing Persons with Diane Diamond. It was canceled after 1 month. So they go back to an hour of MSNBC Investigates, a pre-taped show every night in October of 2000. Then, as the election approached, it became News Force with Forrest Sawyer. News Force! I don't want to know who thought Force was a good name to put in a newscast. So that evolved into Decision 2000 in December because there was no decision in the election. And it became Decision 2000 with Forrest Sawyer. And when they finally, to MSNBC's great regret, resolved the Gore-Bush election in January 2001, it became MSNBC Investigates again, till July. And in July of 2001, they solved the crisis of what to do at 8 o'clock, only 2.5 years after I had left. The News with Brian Williams at 8 o'clock for nearly 14 months. And then he said, I don't want anything to do with MSNBC ever again. In September 2002, at 8 o'clock, they premiered The Phil Donahue Show, which lasted until February 2003 because the show cost more money than they could possibly make in advertising. And they replaced it with Countdown Iraq with Lester Holt and segments with Pat Buchanan and Bill Press in the middle of a show getting America ready for war. At 8 o'clock, MSNBC had Countdown Iraq with Lester Holt and Buchanan and Press. And then they had to move Lester Holt to the network. And so Operation Iraqi Freedom with Keith Olbermann. Soon, that was not enough. The news from Iraq was no longer interesting, and we made it Countdown with Keith Olbermann. March 31st, 2003. So that was 20 shows. Me, 20 new shows in 4 years, and then me again. Because you can't have this. And then after I left in 2011, it was The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell for a while. 9 months. Then they put Ed Schultz on instead. Then they put in Chris Hayes in 2013. The idea here is to return finally to the subject of Joy Reid. You put people on TV who you, the executives, can control. When the chips are down, when the company is in trouble, when the boss goes to the anchor and says, don't say this, they say, don't say what? And then they don't say anything. When the company is in trouble, when a dollar might not be earned, you won't hear crap out of Maddow or O'Donnell or Hayes or Sanders or Steele or Menendez or Jen Psaki. My version of this, and it might have been stylistically, philosophically, it might have been the only thing I shared with Joy Reid, was that when the chips were down in this circumstance and a dollar was at risk, I felt it was my job to say what they did not want me to say. Not always. There are sometimes management is right. But if they don't want you to touch a controversial topic, grab it with both hands. That's your job. If not, if you're not willing to do that, you can be replaced. You can be replaced by missing persons with Diane Diamond. Nothing against Diane. I used to work with her in radio. Lovely woman. You could be replaced by News Force. News Force. We break down your door and drag you away. It is your job as a political commentator to get yourself into trouble whenever possible. Now, whenever necessary. I did that. Joy Reid did that. I'm sure she looked at my times in trouble and went, "What are you doing that for?" And I know I've looked at her in some occasions and gone, "What are you doing that for?" Doesn't matter. The other thing you're supposed to do is you are supposed to spend your political capital, your small p political capital, your business capital, inside your own operation, defending your colleagues or becoming a pain in the ass to management. Develop a reputation with management to get people they didn't want hired, or to get people they didn't want on the air. Maddow's a perfect example of that. I'm not going to belabor that point. But Joy Reid did that with a dozen people. And they might as well have been Huey Newton from the eyes of MSNBC management from the day they put her on the air on the weekends to the day they put her on at 8 o'clock with the current executives who just sold the thing off so they could distance themselves from anything good in television news. Again, I will be delighted to come out here and apologize profusely and for an hour, and this has been half an hour here. I will profusely apologize to anybody at MSNBC who stands up in defense of Joy Reid and says, "This stinks, this makes us white, this is contributing to the entirety of the Trump racism enveloping this country, and it is part of a stampede to see which formerly liberal company can get to the head of the racism line, the approved racism line, as fast as possible." And Joy Reid getting removed from the primetime lineup of MSNBC is MSNBC's biggest contribution yet, although Scarborough could top it at any moment. But honestly, what do you expect to hear about Joy Reid from the other people who count at MSNBC? You want to hear it again? Worst person's next, and the sad self-destruction of a man named Wayne Gretzky, formerly of Canada. Now, the man without a country. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Sports Center. Wait, check that. Not anymore. This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
From the Sports Ball Central Center news desk tonight, Dateline, Boston, Massachusetts. Hello. Okay, when I get them wrong, I get them wrong. That irrelevant NHL Four Nations Face-Off exhibition series that I complained about last week before it happened turned out to be as big a hockey event as anything since probably the 1980 Miracle on Ice. 9,300,000 viewers on ABC last Thursday night for the final game between the U.S. and Canada, which was won by the good guys. You heard me. These days, Canada is America if America had not dropped out of school. Anyway, now that the tournament is over, and it isn't really over, the Canadians are still talking about it. Oh my God, this is the one downturn to this. The Canadians will be showing the highlights of that overtime winning goal for the next 67 years. As the planet burns to a cinder, the last thing seen on Canadian television will be that goal. But in the interim, there are two questions. Were the circumstances for this unique? Could it be replicated and institutionalized? Or was it a one-off? Was this just about Trump's 51st state and tariff idiocy and what is perceived in Canada as a mortal threat to the nation? Oh, yeah, well, yeah, we're thinking of invading Canada. That's not the way they see it. Because the U.S.-Canada rivalry has always been gigantic in Canada, but here it's more like, all right, I guess we're rivals. All right, I guess they would be offended if we're going to invade them. Oh, yeah, I suppose so. What's that newest movie being made out of a comic book? Avenger action, Star Wars, Galaxy comic book. Canadian hockey figures often bring up the 2010 Olympic gold medal game, which was decided by Sidney Crosby's golden goal, Canada over the U.S., as if it would hurt you as an American very badly. I don't know what percentage of Americans know about the 2010 Olympics. It's got to be something like 0.1%. In Canada, it's something like 99.9%. This tournament registered, probably because of the booing the American anthem stuff, with a lot of morons in this country, the morons who think it just sort of happened, the booing of the American anthem at National Hockey League games, and it was not instigated, provoked, entirely created by Trump's insane threats. Or the smarter ones know that this started with Trump's threats, but they still reacted viscerally, or viscerally in English, as if no provocation could possibly justify booing our beloved national song that all Americans know by heart. Well, no, almost nobody can sing it here. 90% of American professional singers who go out and sing it at ball games get at least one wrong word. Usually, instead of saying, "or the land of the free," O-E-R, O''E-R, it's an abbreviation for over. Invariably, that is sung as "for the land of the free," usually twice. Anyway, from a hockey viewpoint, the whole thing was gold. But the problem is gold, as in Olympic gold. The NHL is going to interrupt its season next year for the Winter Olympics in Italy. Then the NHL plans to resume the World Cup of hockey in 2028. Now, its players want this Four Nations face-off to return. That would presumably be in 2027, but the Swedes and the Finns are demanding that some games be played in Scandinavia. Oh, that's right. The Swedes and the Finns had teams in the Four Nations face-off, too. You may not have noticed them. They were, as we say in trade, filler. Now, this is all well and good for a hockey championship. Of course, there should be games in Europe. It's a Swedish team and a Finnish team. And it's all good for Canadian hockey fans who think the idea of going to Finland in February for a Canada-Finland game is a reasonable vacation. But the NHL has already forgotten the real lesson of the success of the tournament last week. In the United States, sports fans, they don't really care about the Olympics. When they do care about the Olympics, it's about the American team about to win in the Olympics, nothing else. If that had been America versus Finland in the final, that would not have been 9,300,000 viewers. It might have been 930 viewers. Because, we didn't threaten to invade Finland yet. Which brings me to my second question. The NHL has this history of not just failing to exploit marketing gifts, but absolutely erasing them. The league did almost nothing after the Americans won the 1980 Olympics. It would have required contractual and legal gymnastics, but the play would have been to take that American Olympic team that beat the Russians intact and give it its own franchise. Put it in the Stanley Cup playoffs and see how it does against the pros. Of course, nobody even contemplated doing something like that or some sliver of that. The players were instead scattered among all the other teams and fell back into obscurity. Nice movie, not nice playing careers. In 1994, though, the New York Rangers won their first Stanley Cup in 54 years. Not that they really tried for most of that time. I mean, their owners owned the arena, and the owners would still refuse to give up valuable money renting Madison Square Garden to the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus every April. The New York Rangers made the Stanley Cup final in 1950, and they had to play all 7 games on the road because their home arena, owned by the team, was busy. is being used for the circus so the elephants could take a dump on center ice. Still, in 1994, the Rangers winning was a story that in the utterly New York-centric advertising world of 31 years ago completely blotted out basketball and football and baseball, at least for a couple of weeks. Madison Avenue was prepared to go to Madison Square Garden and spend all of its money there the next season, and of course the next season the NHL owners locked out the players. The next hockey game after the Rangers hoisted the Stanley Cup was 221 days later. They didn't play till the following January, and by then the momentum was not just dead, it was forgotten. If the NHL is really interested in taking the unlikely success of the Four Nations face-off and turning it into increased popularity and profits, it would make it A, an annual event, B, and make it into the Two Nations face-off. A best 4 out of 7 series scheduled over 2 weeks, America versus Canada, period. Finns, Swedes, Russians. Here's a home version of the Two Nations face-off game you can play in your basement. If you insist that some of the greatest players are not North American, fine. You can have the coaches and the captains of the American and the Canadian teams draft 2 or 3 non-North Americans as honorary Americans or Canadians. If you insist. You have to have Alex Ovechkin there. Although I'd rather have him on the Canadian team than the American team. I don't want anything with that guy. They won't do this. The Canadian teams would never accept this. They want this tournament. They want this tournament. They want to beat the world. Especially us, but not just us. I mean, America's satisfied to beat the Canadian team. We don't need to beat the Finns. 7/8 of our population doesn't know what a Finland is. We're morons here. We dropped out of school in the 9th grade. I'm not saying the Canadians are wrong. The franchises, no, they're not wrong. The commissioner and the Canadian influencers in the NHL, they're not wrong. I'm just being bloodless and mercenary. I'm pretending I'm a businessman. But there are 32 franchises in the National Hockey League, and 25 of them are in the United States. That's 78%. Or, if you prefer, 78% or 78% Celsius. Dateline Los Angeles or Brantford, Ontario or somewhere. There was one awful, terrible, serious component to the Four Nations Cup. The public disintegration of the man who was probably Canada's greatest living hero, accelerated and may not be reversible now. Wayne Gretzky. For a nation still grieving from the day he was traded away by Edmonton 36 years ago last August, it is almost impossible to believe, but Canada is now furious at Wayne Gretzky. The Canadians had pretty much come to terms with Gretzky's lurch to the right. His son-in-law has been a Trumpist. His wife has been one. Okay, he was still Wayne Gretzky. He wore a MAGA hat. But Wayne Gretzky, he was Wayne Gretzky. He took over the role of Gordie Howe after Gordie Howe died, so he's both Wayne Gretzky and Gordie Howe's ghost. So what? He went to Trump's election night victory party and the inauguration. It happens. White guys get old. But when Trump turned on Canada and threatened to invade or buy it or turn it into the 51st state or pressure it, Gretzky said nothing. Then Trump said Gretzky was his great friend, said Gretzky should run for prime minister. Gretzky laughed. Then Trump said, no, let's make it governor of Canada, of our 51st state. And Gretzky said nothing. Then, when this tournament played out, in the middle of Trump's threats, Canada standing up metaphorically, symbolically for its national existence, Gretzky, honorary captain of Team Canada, not only did not wear a Canadian jersey at any point, the honorary American captain wore an American jersey, but he didn't stick up for the place that made him a hero, literally a companion of the Order of Canada. He didn't even visit the Canadian team before the game. And before the title game against the U.S. last Thursday, Gretzky was seen, recorded on camera, giving a thumbs up to the American team. After the Canadians beat the American team, Gretzky stopped by the locker room. As the Toronto Star wrote after the win, quote, he handed the Canadian players hats that said, "Be great." I hope somebody threw it at him and said, "We are great. You're the one who's no longer great." Terry Jones, a sports writer who covered Gretzky's entire career with the Edmonton Oilers and covered the team for 55 years, has now written, I authored books on Wayne Gretzky. I covered him for a decade in Edmonton in the WHA and NHL and extensively after he departed. I have viewed him as the greatest player in history and as a great Canadian. He needs to face the nation and explain his relationship with Donald Trump. And more than that, perhaps, there is a freeway in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, named for Wayne Gretzky. Named for Wayne Gretzky. And there is a group of locals there now trying to get his name removed from the freeway. Known Wayne Gretzky since 1988. I broke the story of him getting traded from Edmonton to Los Angeles. I always liked him. Not a big, effusive guy, but stood up when it counted. Not anymore. Got to make a choice here now, Gretz. It's your time. Do or die. It's Trump or your soul. You clearly cannot have both. And clearly, you already do not have both. Before I wrap this up, boy, this has been a long edition. Believe it or not, there are still more new idiots to talk about. The daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's other worst persons in the world, as if there's anybody left. Here are the nominees. They are all elected officers, and two of them are Democrats, I guess. Bronze, worst runner-up, Senator Tom Tillis of North Carolina. 2 tweets. From yesterday, President Trump has accomplished more in 1 month than Joe Biden did in 4 years. Well, if you nuke a country, right, you can be said to have accomplished more in 1 second than all the other presidents combined. Also, from Senator Tom Tillis, that's Tom with an H. Donald J. Trump is our president. Pam Bondi is our attorney general. Kash Patel is our FBI director. It's a great time to be an American. That's a point of view. It's a damn shame Trump, Bondi, and Patel aren't Americans. Anyway, what's so special about this? I mean, he's a Republican. Tom Tillis was not necessarily ever a never-Trumper, but as late as 2023, he was censured by the North Carolina State Party, the GOP, in his home state for not being MAGA enough. Jesus. So what is this rancid toadying about? It's a great time to be an American. Pam Bondi is our attorney. Pam Bondi put Dwight Gooden in jail and has a good stylist. Those are her life accomplishments. So what's all the rancid toadying about from Senator Tillis? Well, guess who's up for election next year? And maybe a primary. The technical term for what Tillis is gutless scumbag. The runner-up worser, Governor Jared Polis of Colorado, nominally a Democrat, he went on Morning Collaborators, MSNBC, alongside Kevin Stitt, the fascist governor of Oklahoma, who looks even more fascist now that he's grown a beard. Because he's trying to look like Lincoln. Trying to look like Lincoln. You know what he's accomplished in looking like Lincoln? He also looks like he was born in 1807. Governor Polis saying he agrees with Trump about saving money and about how flawed FEMA is. Not the wrecking ball part, but I want to commend Trump and I want to commend, like, F you, Governor. First off, you're on Morning Joe. Grandpa Joe was off that day. Grandma Joe was there, though. And you're sitting next to Kevin Stitt. First off, his name is Stitt. He's the governor of Oklahoma, where they are trying to put the Bible in the classroom in lieu of all the textbooks. And you're sitting next to this guy. And he's selling Musk talking points as if these were the opinions of human beings. And he's the one Jared Polis, who saw great promise in Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. F you, pal. Get the F out of my country, you collaboratist, Vichy son of a bitch, and stupid son of a bitch. Resign. But the winner, the worst, Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey. I want to thank President Trump and Secretary Duffy. I mean, that's enough, right? You don't need to even hear the rest of this. I want to thank President Trump and Secretary. Well, you do that and get the hell out of the Democratic Party, asshole. I want to thank President Trump and Secretary Duffy, writes Governor Murphy, for their efforts to halt the current congestion pricing program. While I have consistently expressed openness to a form of congestion pricing, this is the tax that is being charged, as it has been done in countless cities around the world, on people who don't live in a state and yet come in and commute into the city that's already too congested and choking on its own pollution and needs money for transportation that is being threatened by President Trump and Secretary Duffy. This is the New York City means of coping with that, and Governor Murphy is spitting all over it, and I don't mean spitting. While I've consistently expressed openness to a form of congestion pricing, the current program lines the MTA's pockets at the expense of New Jerseyans. You know who runs on the MTA? You know what sort of trains, what people run or ride on the MTA? People from New Jersey do, and people from Connecticut, and people from New York. It is the greatest mass transportation system in the world. It is the only thing that makes the city of New York functional, and it's underfunded. And it also costs nothing. It costs less than $3, and you can go in one day and come out like 6 weeks later for $3. Governor Murphy, get out. Out. Get the F out. I mean, I suppose you think the city of New York should pay for your Jersey residents' train fares into the city, too? We have a lot of nerve charging you for congesting our streets that you don't do anything to improve, or giving you some place to go when otherwise you and your people would have to spend your entire lives in New Jersey. I used to commute to this city from Westchester County. It was a privilege. I got to live in a spacious, open area with trees, and for a nominal cost, I used to get the train in here, or a car, pay the tolls, come on in. I used to commute from the city to New Jersey, and there was never any traffic going to New Jersey. You know why? Because who in the hell wanted to leave New York City to go to freaking Jersey on purpose? Unless you've been served a subpoena, why are you going to New Jersey? Seriously, congestion pricing has made New York City livable again. Traffic now flows. You can go across town. You can go up, you can go down, you can go east, you can go west. There are fewer bridge and tunnels vomiting outside clubs at 2 o'clock in the morning. We're funding improvements and safety measures for the subway, and I'm sure business has picked up in places like Secaucus, New Jersey, the only city in America that is entirely devoted to factory outlet stores. Burberry, factory outlet store. London Fog, factory outlet. Major League Baseball, factory outlet, etc. Governor Phil, Governor, shut up or resign. I don't care. There's one thing about governors of New Jersey we learned from Chris Christie and all who preceded him. There's always another governor of Jersey waiting to happen. Murphy, today's other worst person in the world! I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. And goodbye to all of you who are from New Jersey. I'm sorry. You know it's true. I understand. Just say you don't want to pay the money. I'd have greater respect if you just said, we don't want to pay this money. It costs too much. A congressman named Gottheimer said, well, there's environmental concerns. Bullshit. You don't want to pay the money. Just say it. Since when has anybody from Jersey been reluctant to say, I don't want to pay $16? I mean, you're from Jersey. You don't want to pay 16 cents. I get it. It's fine. I wouldn't want to pay $16 to go to Jersey either. Well, there'd be a hell of an excuse not to go there. Okay, I've done enough damage here to myself. Thank you for listening. Brian Ray and John Philip Chenale, musical directors of Countdown, arranged, produced, and performed most of the music. Mr. Chenale on orchestration and keyboards, Mr. Ray on guitars, bass, and drums, and it was all produced by TKO Brothers. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust, who is not from New Jersey. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, which has never been located in New Jersey, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was, I'm in trouble now. My announcer today was my friend, Stevie Van Zandt, who has portrayed someone from New Jersey. What? Everything else was, as ever, my fault. That's Countdown for today, just 1,427 days until the scheduled end of the lame duck, lame brain term of Donald T. Rump, unless Musk removes him sooner or the actuarial tables do. The next scheduled countdown is Thursday. As always, bulletins as the news warrants. Remember, impeach Trump. It will not work now. It will win the Democrats the midterms. If we have midterms. If we ever have an election again. I don't want congestion pricing because it's lining the pockets. You don't want to spend the $16. Just say it. Till next time, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good effing luck.